I was raised in the Christian tradition, and we believe in all you're getting, get an understanding. So before we begin this podcast and I introduce historical figures and more complex individuals and Black women in particular who have overcome obstacles, I want to make sure I provide context and a deeper understanding of the difference between invisible and unseeable. Black women, we possess both in this country. As I sat and thought about the distinctions between invisible and unseeable as it relates to social identities, I realized that white supremacy, in other terms, means that which is visible, which is white, and recognizable, supreme, or superiority is what it means to live in the center. And all of those who don't have those qualifiers live along the margins. We are socialized to think of people in terms of gender and race above anything else. If you were to apply invisible and unseeable and plug it into any race or gender, I guarantee you that when you looked at the unseeable, they are the most vulnerable and underrepresented of the population. To recognize and empathize with my humanity for many is a large feat, especially the more privileged and closer one's identity resides to the center. So I want to share a story about work travel while being a Black woman. I was always somewhat anxious ridden and when I had to travel, especially when I was much younger. I was directed in office before I was 25 years old. And so, as a first generation Black woman, we didn't have vacations, we didn't do a lot. And when it came to travel, I was nervous because of my lack of exposure. And while we were learned and educated in our family, we did not have the benefit to travel often. So, first, growing up, I was sharing a room. It was seven of us in a two-bedroom home. My sister and I, we didn't own clothes, okay? We shared them. They didn't belong to anybody. Whosoever will, let them wear. The bathroom situation, it was one of us. Just it was one bathroom and seven people, rather. So using the bathroom was a tactical response and an exercise that required timing and skill. Privacy, first of all, in a Black household, what the hell does that mean? Because there's no such thing as privacy. I remember one time my father was so pissed at us because we kept trying to lock the door. He took the damn door off the hinges. So we had no privacy. And that was when we had bedrooms. But growing up, my sister and I, our bedroom was the living room. And literally, I swear, my sister was in a crib until she was at least five. She used to be able to walk up out of that sucker. So the ability for us to have two beds in the living room wasn't possible until I got much older. So this is an example of what I mean when I think about surface versus depth. So invisibility when thinking about surface is concerned with what is seen. What's on the surface? What would actually you can visualize? While unseeable, which is a depth, relates to the depth of a person's identity, history, and inner life that remains out of reach. So an example when we're thinking about this is also around cultural narratives versus individual realities. And I think if we can get to a point where we can move beyond our individual realities and think about cultural narratives and think about how people historically have lived, how cultures predominantly have certain types of experiences, we'll be able to better understand and recognize what it means to be those particular identities and the context by which we are able to navigate and move in our society. So, Black women born in the US are often unseeable because dominant cultural narratives overshadow our unique stories. Erasure, the complexity of our lived experiences are often not even mentioned or even appear anywhere in one's imagination or in one's practices, policies, or procedures. Invisibility, by contrast, happens when their presence is simply not acknowledged in everyday interactions. But unseeability, however, is a different story. So, just a little information about me. I have a degree. Okay. I went to a very good school. I went to public education, K through my doctorate program, and I have a degree. So my background is similar to that of my peers. Okay. I have had experiences in undergrad. I did get to travel somewhat in undergrad because I was on the speech and debate team. And we also had opportunities to travel as student leaders. But to take on that or to consider that as a part of my understanding and socialization of travel as an adult is very different. And we know, and let's just be clear, all families do not vacation. And while we think about notions of business and pleasure and travel, while most families, regardless of race, do not have those options, it was difficult for me to pass in this situation. And when I say pass, it means that one would not even think twice to assume that I would know how to navigate this type of space. And so the first time I was to travel at my job, I was supposed to share a room. And let me just say this. It wasn't a institution or a place that was lacking resources, but that was the culture. And unfortunately, that culture for me expired once I graduated from undergrad. So the sharing room thing, that was not something that was legible to me as a grown ass woman in need of her own privacy. So in just thinking about this example, I want us to go back to the surface versus depth and cultural narratives versus individual realities. And just let's just end with these three questions I want you to think about. Do you think these experiences shape the way I see travel and accommodation? How does my experience shape those types of conversations? How do you, as an individual, have that kind of conversation with a supervisor? How do you tell your supervisor you lost your damn mind? I'm a grown ass woman. How do you have that conversation with a supervisor? And how do you have the conversation? But more importantly, why do I need to disclose that type of information to my supervisor in order to receive a level of comfort that's necessary for me to thrive professionally? And what I found out through my career often is that I was unseeable. I sat at those tables, I sat in those rooms, I was a part of the conversations, I was a part of the dialogue. But when the rubber met the road, when it was time for things to be done at a larger scope and a larger scale, I was unrecognizable. And so I found myself a lot of times in these spaces being the angry Black woman or being the person that people assumed that I was haughty or I was stuck up or I was antisocial because I didn't want to share a room with a perfect stranger. I didn't want someone who worked with me to see my drawers. I didn't want someone who worked with me to see my pajamas. I didn't want someone who worked with me to see me brush my teeth. And I damn sure didn't want somebody who worked with me to hear me snore. But that's what it means to be unseeable. There is nothing, there's no space in between for someone to take into consideration that my background makes it difficult, makes it hard, makes it embarrassing, makes it almost self deprecating that I would have to share a room with someone after spending my entire childhood, 7 people in a 2-bedroom apartment with one bathroom. This is what it means to be unseeable Black woman. Stay tuned for more stories. If you like this, like and subscribe. Please share your comments. Please share your experiences. I'm always looking for stories. Black women born in this country, if you have a story, I want to give you a platform. This is Dr. Meredith Davis with the Unseeable Black Woman's Podcast.